The fAFSA stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. It's usually available around October 1st for the following academic year. So in the fall is when you think about generally applying for financial aid for the following academic year. So a little bit more on the fAFSA. The fAFSA is simply a standard form on which demographic and financial information is collected about the student and their family. The parent and the student each need to create a federal student aid ID or username and password. You'll use that or reuse that username and password to do various things. You'll use it to complete the fAFSA every year. You'll use it if you need to log back into the fAFSA and correct any information that needs to be corrected if you realize you made a mistake. You'll use it to complete the processes you need to in order to borrow the federal student or parent loan. So you'll both need to create what's called an FSA user ID and password, and you can do that very early in the process. It does not have to be at the same time you complete the actual fAFSA. So you could do that, tonight if you wanted to get started on that. You can. It's good for 10 years. You keep that FSA user ID and password and reuse it again in the future. The fAFSA is available in both English and Spanish. And you're putting on there, when you complete the fAFSA, which has been streamlined to be have even fewer questions than it used to, and be more intuitive than it used to as well. You'll list on there all the colleges you want your information sent to. And you want to put the colleges on there, list all the colleges, even if you don't yet know whether you're admitted. So you complete the fAFSA and the profile in advance of knowing whether you're admitted to any college. You send the financial aid application just like you send an admission application by entering the code or the name of the college. The college receives your data, and we only act on it if ultimately you end up being admitted to our college. If you don't end up being admitted, then eventually your data just gets purged. So don't wait until you're admitted before completing your financial aid applications. The most important thing is to get them completed by the financial aid stated deadline. The student is the one who needs to initiate the fAFSA process, needs to begin it using the FSA user ID that they create either at that time or in advance. The URL to complete that, to create your FSA user ID and password is listed right on here. And you're going to set up the form with your basic information, such as your name, your date of birth, your social security number, are you going for your bachelor's degree or your master's degree, demographic information like that, whether you're a dependent or independent student. In other words, it's going to ask you, are you a veteran? Are you a ward of the court? Do you have dependents like children? And you'll go through and answer those questions. And when the student section is all done, you'll end it, and then the parent can log in using their user ID and password and finish the application with their demographic and financial information as well. And the parents are called contributors in the new process. A reminder that, we know parents are super helpful in this process to students, and they're helping them complete the financial aid application. And that's awesome and wonderful when that can happen. And if the parent's helping by completing the application, they need to remember that it's the student's information on which the student's application on which parental information is provided. So it's the student's financial aid application where the parent's providing their data so that you all can be evaluated for financial aid eligibility. And as I mentioned on a previous slide, that the student now, and this is different for this year, the student initiates the fAFSA by logging in, and then contributors add and supplement the information the student provides. Here's a tip too, that if the parents are married but filed taxes separately. For the first time now, both parents must create a user ID and password so that both can authorize the FAFSA processor to retrieve that data from the IRS, that income data from the IRS. So that's new and different and something for families to be aware of. Families should know too that database matches are occurring once the FAFSA is submitted. So Homeland Security is checking for the citizenship status of the student to be considered for federal financial aid eligibility. The citizenship status of the parent does not affect the student's eligibility for federal student aid. It's only the student's citizenship status for the FAFSA for federal student aid. On the FAFSA, the database match for Social Security numbers is also occurring. So the name that the student uses to create their user ID and password has to match the Social Security number at the Social Security Administration. Excuse me. So no shortening names. Use whatever for this process, use whatever the Social Security Administration has as your name. So, Jonathan, not John. You want to make sure that matches exactly so that you can have a valid FAFSA. The same is true of the parent name. So sometimes when a person gets married, they change their name legally, but they haven't yet updated their name with the Social Security Administration. My advice is to update your name with the Social Security Administration. But if you don't do that, use whichever name matches exactly with the Social Security Administration when you're completing the FAFSA. Divorced and separated or remarried families have some special instructions here. On the student's FAFSA, you need to use the parent who is going to provide more than 50% support to the student. You don't need to know what the rule used to be, but that is different. So even if the student is not living with that parent, whichever parent provides more than 50% support is the parent who has to provide their data on the FAFSA, create a user ID and password, and sign it in order to do so. If that parent is remarried, that parent's current spouse also has to provide their information on the FAFSA as well. Only that set of that parent or that parent and step-parent's data is on the FAFSA. The other parent does not have to provide any of their data on the FAFSA. If the parents are divorced and separated and filed jointly, so it's a kind of the opposite situation as the first one that I mentioned. So if they file jointly, you have to provide consent for the IRS to pull in your data, your income data, because there's a whole process behind the scenes for the FAFSA where the IRS is going to populate those income questions for you. So you still have to provide consent for the IRS to pull in your information, but you're going to override that in the case where you file jointly but are divorced or separated and only report that one parent's income information manually. And that's a little confusing. I'm happy to go through that again at the end if there are any questions about that. In terms of assets on the financial aid application, this is really the the financial portion that you'll be completing that won't be transferred from the IRS. You just want to remember you don't include retirement plans. So any funds you have in a 401k or a 403b, they are not reported anywhere on the FAFSA. If you report them on the FAFSA, you'll be making a mistake. So you make sure to not include them. We won't, the financial aid office won't be able to pick up on that kind of mistake. We won't know that you've made that mistake. So make sure you don't do that. You also don't include the value or debt of your home on the FAFSA. They do not consider that when determining your eligibility for federal student aid. So make sure not to include your home value. 529 college savings plan, if your family has one of those for you or someone, another dependent in your household, those do have to be included as an asset in the parent section of the financial aid application, not in the student section. UGMAs and UTMAs, if you don't know what those are, don't worry about it. That means you probably don't have one. If you do have one of those kinds of savings programs, those have to be reported in the student's portion of the assets, not in the parent portion. And finally, a tip here, don't use the your high school email address on the FAFSA. Because oftentimes that expires after you graduate or shortly after you graduate, and the FAFSA processor is going to be communicating with you over the years through this financial aid application process. And the email address you use is really key to being able to get back into the FAFSA in the future. So use a Gmail or some other kind of general account or create one if you don't have one.